Arabs residing in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip are not and never have been Israeli citizens, and therefore they cannot claim rights due to Israeli citizens. You know what I'm trying to get?
But I understand your point.
Wait, Patrick, you gotta let him finish. He's been waiting.
Okay, no, I'll let him finish. Of course.
Yeah,
Talking stick is in Stoic's hands. Okay. Thank you so much for calling in. I appreciate it. I know it's late where you are in Kiev. I couldn't imagine being there. Yeah, you're a real hero, Patrick. I want you to know that.
Very funny. Very funny, Dylan. Very funny.
Okay, so thank you so much for coming on. If you want to quickly introduce yourself before we open up this gigantic can of worms, it'd be easier for the viewers.
Yeah, I'm Pat Hilsman. I've been out here in Ukraine with Dylan, and I covered the Syrian conflict before Ukraine, and I spent some time in Israel and the West Bank a long time ago, like 15 years ago.
Thank you so much. So we just went through a breakdown of the events. I just wanted to ask you quickly, what's your take on everything that's going on? Why is it happening? And what do you think about the history that's happening right now?
Well, I mean, I think that basically, I wanted to start by saying that I think that Israel has been oppressing Gaza for generations, and it is truly an open-air prison, and when they say that, that's not false. So the wall that separates Gaza from the rest of historic Palestine and Israel is going to come down one way or another, whether that's through passive resistance or through violence.
Burns is an
but none of that means that
corrupt,
shit's
bankrupt
okay.
man.
Like, what happened was unequivocally an attack on civilians and like children being taken hostage. So I think that I'm actually kind of shocked by the fact that more people don't have my view on it, that what's happening is the result of a generational independent struggle, but is still like a horrifying act of inhuman violence.
So the first thing I wanted to ask you about is, how was Israel just so unbelievably, I mean, I doubt anyone has the answer to this right now, but it feels like Israel was just completely unprepared in any way. They didn't have forces down south to respond. It feels like they had no knowledge of this whatsoever. I mean, this is a massive failure for the Mossad, isn't it?
I guess so, but like it's hard to even speculate what they're thinking about right now. And in Israel right now, the politics, like internal politics between Netanyahu and other members of the Knesset and or members of his cabinet and members of the Knesset, backstabbing, coalition building, his corruption charges, his attempts to mess with the Supreme Court in Israel, like all these different things are where most of the civic energy has been going now. I mean, there's been a huge protest movement against the prime minister of the country because he's trying to usurp power. So it's like, you know, when something from the outside happens or from within the territory that they control and the people that they're policing and oppressing happens, it can come as a shock to like a society that's not focused at all on security and is more focused on like internal politics and like supremacy ultimately.
I wanted to ask, I know I was with you all day, so I saw you reacting live and in person. I got the deep scoop nobody else can see right now to all of the reactions to these attacks. So I wanted to ask you, what did you think about Israel's society's larger reaction to this and Palestine society's larger reaction to this and the people that support both sides?
Well, I'll start with Joe Biden's reaction because I think that's the one that matters the most, but I'll definitely hit on those. And I think that the way that the U.S. wants to just give a green light to complete fucking madness. And despite the atrocity of what this is, letting Israel like reinvade Gaza, reoccupy Gaza is going to just kill thousands and thousands of people, and it will keep escalating. This is a disaster, and I would encourage anybody that's listening to you that the best place to put their energy would be to acknowledge the horror of what happened, acknowledge the disgustingness of what was done, but to advocate for there not to be an escalation. Because it's going to be bad, and the people that will die will always be innocent people. I mean, I really ultimately think that the best solution would be to try to it's a terrible solution, but to try to find a way to negotiate to get those hostages out. I mean, like Ukraine does it every day, despite the horrors of Russian. They're in situations where they have to release rapists and war criminals for their innocent people, and just because Israel has done terrible things to Palestinians, I mean that these aren't innocent. And I hope that something can be done to try and like get them out of there and avoid a huge war. I'm naive to think that. I don't necessarily think that will happen, but for people to just think that this imbecile Netanyahu is gonna lead some crusade to get these people free and then the Hamas be under control, it's idiotic. Like it's the worst thing you could possibly do is trust this to a unilateral Israeli that isn't even unified, like in and of itself. So I just want to start with that to get that out of the way. But my take on some of the reactions that I've seen. I understand why people in Palestinian society could feel that it's justified, but they're wrong to feel that it's justified. But again, they've also been living in conditions that are just unthinkable to us. Like we can't even. There's nothing to even compare it to. Like if you imagine living 4, 5, 6, 7 generations where you can't leave an area that's like the size of Manhattan, but that has none of the resources that you need to build a good, educated, flourishing society. And it's just to have your entire life boxed in like that. For them, it's not hard to understand how something that's horrible like this might not seem as horrible to those people. So you can't really, not all takes are created equal on this. It's not how it works. People's experience matter. And broadly in Israeli society, obviously the leadership are going to do what they keep doing because their position was basically kill them all, displace them all before anything like this had ever happened. So they are morally bankrupt in what they say. It matters in the sense that it's going to impact what they do, but morally it carries no weight because these are people that would have seen the Palestinian population displaced no matter what they'd done. If it's passive resistance, they call it an attack. And the BDS movement has been going on for years, and they've denounced that as something horrifying. And now we see something that's actually horrifying. And what moral stand do they have? What moral weight do they have now? None. So I think that the reactions from the leadership of Israel are completely morally bankrupt. The words they say might be true that this is an atrocity, but coming from them, it's almost meaningless. But on the flip side, some of the reactions I've seen from Israeli society have actually been surprisingly. There have been some reactions that have been surprisingly good amongst like a sea of really bad reactions, and that are driven by emotions, obviously, because if you lose almost 1,000 of your own people in a day, you're obviously going to have rational anger and rage. So there's no holding it against regular Israeli people for being so angry, but we have to hold leaders to higher standards. And I think that the way that Western countries are just kind of like giving carte blanche to Israel right now, despite the horror of this, is really, really fucking dangerous and inhuman. And like they just cut water to Gaza. They're bombing entire neighborhoods. The Israeli military is posting on Twitter about how, we targeted this area. We targeted this area of Gaza, and it's known to have terrorists in it. Like that's saying like, we targeted Kyiv. It's known to have Nazis, like what the Russians say. It's not a good. It's not rational, and it's displaying war crimes in front of the entire world in the same way that Hamas has been displaying their war crimes in front of the entire world. These are not good people firing on both sides. Like this is really bad, and I think that a lot of the takes from the American left have been totally like fucking disgusting.
What if somebody was to say, I mean, if an Israeli was to respond to you, if we negotiate with this will just encourage more kidnappings, or that, hey, there are terrorists in the Gaza Strip, they just murdered grandma, grandpa, whatever, what would you say to that?
True. Doesn't mean that they're good, that should doesn't mean that you should endorse what they did, or that you should like do anything to normalize what they did. But it's like, what else is going to happen if they go in and just bomb the shit out of everything? it's not going to save the hostages. It's going to end up with a lot more death. It's terrible. It's not a rational strategy. It would make sense for them to feel that way. You know, they have every right to feel that way. But we're not Palestinian. We're not Israeli. People that are third parties need to call for peace and freedom for everybody. Like the only real solution to this conflict is one person, one vote. That's it. You know, whether it's a federal republic of Israel and Palestine, whether it's Israel-Palestine, whether it's Pal-Israel, whatever it is, like it's gonna have to be one person, one vote. So if that's two states or one state, I don't know, but that's the solution that everybody knows is the only solution. And Hamas kidnapping people to try and get concessions isn't going to change anything for the better, and Israel trying to level the Gaza Strip isn't going to change anything for the better. And just seeing these people that are just these hipster fucking douchebags on both sides taking these campus positions is really sickening to me. And I saw some of the protesters in New York, like, talking about the hipsters being dragged away. I think it was the Party for Socialist Liberation or whatever you call them. PSL.
It was his name's Eugene. What was his last name? Eugene.
The RT guy that I tweeted about.
Yeah, I forget his last name. I think it's Eugene something, but it's Eugene. What a name.
How would any of those people that are out there calling this like really horrifying act decolonization, how would they feel if somebody kidnapped them because of some fucked up shit that America did? Like, there's no moral justification for it. And like, you really can see through a lot of these people. Like, a lot of these people really are scum. These were innocent people that were killed, and it had nothing to do with it. And that's what's ironic, is that if Hamas wanted to take a stand and like show themselves to be fighting for liberation or whatever they think they're fighting for, like they won for like 2 minutes, and then they just shot themselves right in the dick. Because like they burst out of Gaza, something that no Arab state was able to achieve fighting Israel. They defeated the myth of Israeli supremacy and invincibility in a day, and then they went around slaughtering hippies. Like, what the fuck? You know, it should be to anybody that even believes in armed struggle for the Palestinians, it should be a tremendous fucking disappointment. And to just see the rationalizations that are being thrown around, it's insane. Like, that doesn't mean that Palestinian resistance is wrong. It doesn't mean that the struggle shouldn't continue. It should. Like, I think people should keep advocating for ways to pressure economically, and people should keep going to rallies for Palestine. If there's a rally for Palestine today, I'll go to it, you know, despite everything that happened. But I'm not going to say this was a great event. Like, this was fucked. This was murder. But also, you know, this was yesterday, and today Israel's bombing the shit out of Gaza and killing entire families and wiping out entire neighborhoods. I don't understand why more people can't just have some moral clarity on this. It's pretty obvious that this is just fucked all around.
Okay, I'm gonna ask for questions from chat. We'll take a few questions for Patrick. Make them tolerable, chat. I would appreciate it. Please do not fill them with any slurs. Or if you do put a slur, make it a fun one. Okay, I got a question. I got a statement from Bath Boy. This is pretty. Do you want the provocative question or the last provocative question?
Whatever, man. Bring it on.
Okay. From Bath Boys, first time putting anything in chat, so they wanted to make sure they came out with a bang. Attending the rave in Israel is the equivalent to if you attended a music festival right outside the Sorbet ghetto or Treblinka and got upset that the uprising/escaping Jews didn't treat you too kindly during your holiday outside their concentration camp.
Did the people in the Warsaw ghetto uprising go around shooting random Polish civilians and kidnapping them? I don't think so. It's a bullshit comparison. And it doesn't. And also, you know, terrible things were committed in the name of anti-Nazi liberation as well. Like, it's not. Lots of liberation movements have committed terrible crimes, but to fucking pretend, then go fucking fight yourself. You know, then go join Hamas, asshole. Like, what do you think? You think that person's life is like somehow like this isn't a game? That person's life actually mattered. They're not some. Like, they're not just some fucking number that you can disassociate with. And comparing it, like, The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, they rose up against their occupiers, against the people that were holding guns against them. They didn't go around killing random German civilians. They didn't go around killing random Polish civilians. That's not what happened.
Okay, I think you solidly answered that question very easily.
It would be like if they it would be like if they broke out of the Warsaw Ghetto and then went to go kill a bunch of like POWs in a camp near it. Like it's just irrational violence.
How can Israel negotiate a peaceful solution with Hamas when Hamas doesn't accept Israel's right to exist and wants to destroy it? From RKBS and Gutter Chat. Site chat, ask questions, you get priority.
I mean, no country, like the term right to exist is like a loaded concept because a lot of Israeli leaders use that concept to say that like as cover for the idea that the Holy Land, like Israel-Palestine, only has a Jewish character, saying that this area has a right to exist as a Jewish state. I think they have a right to exist in the sense that they've been born there for several generations. So they're born there, they should be allowed to live there. But the problem is that they live there in a system that's unjust and is unequal and is an apartheid system. So it's like in a lot of ways.
You said apartheid state.
Yeah.
I know that a lot of people get really angry when that word is used. Why do you use the word apartheid?
Yeah. I don't say apartheid state. I said it's apartheid.
Yeah. So why do you use that word?
Because it is apartheid. It's two systems for two people. Like two systems administered by the same people that apply differently to different people. It's apartheid. It's plain and simple. And if you want to use the apartheid comparison, I think that what we're seeing now is kind of what you probably would have seen in South Africa if apartheid hadn't ended. And also, if both sides or different sides in South Africa hadn't sort of accepted the framework of democracy. Like the ANC accepted that white citizens would stay and would be part of the system. The property wasn't distributed in the way that it should have been, but they accepted that it would be a multicultural country, and the ruling like white class had to accept that they were going to have to just vote and be part of the same country. And South Africa is imperfect, but I would sure as fuck rather live in their system than the system that they have in Israel now.
Chat, if you don't like his take, instead of saying it's a bad take, ask him a question. He's right here. He can answer a question. He's my little attack dog. He'll tear you up. Next questions. Should Egypt open the border so the IDF can clean Gaza from anything Hamas? That is a very provocative question. What do you think about that?
Open the border so that refugees can flee.
Quick and succinct response. Dylan, yo, Patrick, do we end the Gaza blockade while also minimizing Hamas from getting more funding for terrorist action like the... How? He meant how do we do that?
Perfect solution. You can't. There's no like. How do you deal with the fact that there's collaborators in some areas in Ukraine? Like, there's no perfect solution to everything. It has to be through civic society. You can't just shoot your way out of everything. And this isn't the comparisons between Israel and Palestine and Ukraine are fucking offensive to me, because I tweeted this earlier that if Ukraine was like Hamas, they would just kidnap people that are related to Russian generals and kill them, and demand concessions and demand that Russia get the fuck out of our country. And if they were like Israel, the Russian-speaking population wouldn't be allowed to vote, or only a certain percentage of the Russian-speaking population would be allowed to vote. But Ukraine's an actual democracy, so it's not like that. And those takes are all bad takes, and they're nonsense.
What does a two-state solution look like? If a from the river to the sea policy is pursued by both sides, there's no real serious position, either from the leading Israeli side or from the Palestinian side, that makes a two-state solution possible.
Very, very astute. One man, one vote. I think that's the only solution. And that, or cut it according to the 1967 borders. I mean, it doesn't hurt Israel to have it be according to the 1967 borders. Like, they act like it's such an atrocity for them to divide the territory according to what the recognized borders were. But that doesn't involve a huge sacrifice on Israel's part. I'm sorry. Like, accepting the status quo demands a huge sacrifice on the Palestinians' part, but it doesn't require any real sacrifice from the Israelis to have a fair division along the 1967 border.
If you were, I don't know if I want to ask that question, DD. Let's skip that one.
Okay, I'll take it.
Are you sure? Okay. If you
it.
were still in Israel, is this music festival the type of activity you might have went to?
Yep. But also being in the refugee camps in the West Bank is also what I would have done too. So, you know, one side or the other could have killed me when I was there. I guess I'm a fucking happy traveler.
A wanderer. 1 second. Waiting for.
So I have to say this: I never felt in danger from Palestinians, and I did many times feel in danger from Israelis.
Got you.
Soldiers, not regular.
Well, can you describe any of those instances?
Yeah, just whatever. Like at some point, I saw kids throwing rocks at the Apartheid wall, right? And then the fucking army comes out with a jeep and tries to plow into the kids and starts hitting them with tear gas. And at some point, I was like ducking behind a car trying to fill them, and I was afraid they were going to shoot me, man. Like they didn't, you know. But it's fucking terrifying. There's people with big ass guns going around chasing kids that are throwing rocks at a fucking wall. Like, it's just the disproportionateness of all this is not something you can ignore.
Okay. Israel is not interested, but could they aim for a no dead hostage strategy? That's from Flemmy. What do you think of that?
Should be the number one strategy. There are hundreds of hostages that are still alive, and no matter what Netanyahu wants to do that's violent, it's not going to undo the shame and humiliation of letting like this fucking disaster happen on his watch, while he's advocating for the specific minor narrow interests of this very right-wing settler community that has the entire government by the balls right now. And to let this happen is just fucking shameful, and whatever he does is not going to undo that. So having people whose families are hostages die because you know he says we don't negotiate. Well, you know, too bad. Like he negotiated away his moral position. He negotiated away the effectiveness of his state to other people in his cabinet. He sold out, you know, whatever vestiges of democracy there were there to the right wing. Like, he did plenty of negotiating with what Israelis would like to see their society as. And I guess that, you know, if the line of how much you negotiate with your society is you don't negotiate with terrorists, even at the expense of people getting killed, I mean, that's a stand that they can take, but people will die if they take that stance. And it sucks. But I just...
Okay, 1 second. I got a question for you. Let me respond to this quick. What's your thought on the Mercado Media situation? It sucks that his channel is getting copyright striked by the enforcer. Enforcer just kind of seems like, what's the word? Dingbat? I don't know, man. He just kind of seems like an asshole. He needs to lay off Mercado. Like, everybody's telling him to, like, he's not helping his image. He's making himself look like a prick. He's making himself look like a prick to everybody else in the pro-Ukraine space. There's very few people who are genuinely in his corner, and the only ones that are is a subset of his own community, and nobody else is being convinced by his fans. He isn't convincing anyone. Like 99.9% of the time, if you're like going after another like content creator legally, and you're like getting their channels taken down, it's not for a good reason, and you're not going to look good. And even if it is for a good reason, the odds of you coming out of it looking good are like next to impossible. Like, unless Mercado Media came out and was like, I'm going to blow up your home, and it was like, unless something like that happened, which it didn't, then there's not really a good reason to be going after another person's livelihood, which is what he is doing. And as far as I know, the enforcer is quite well off. He doesn't really need to fear any, you know, I'm going to lose my home. I'm going to lose, you know, my way to feed myself. He's fine. But he's knocking out Mercado Media's kneecaps for no good reason. I've been watching them scuffle back and forth. I said a few weeks ago it was funny, but now honestly it's just sad. It's kind of sad to look at. And I don't think any of their viewers are particularly interested in it. Nobody signed up to watch the Enforcer channels or Mercado's channel to watch those two go back and forth. They're not drama channels. This isn't Chud Logic. This is Mercado Media and the Enforcer. These are two people that like to look at maps all day and talk about how the troop movements went around. It's not exactly the pinnacle of drama YouTube. Anyway, he should let go of his channel, and the two people should just stop talking. You know how easy it is to just not be friends with someone, but also not talk to them or talk about each other if you want all this to go away? The silliest moment was when he tried to serve Mercado Media legal papers while he was in Ukraine. That was the silliest moment. But after that, everything else was no longer funny. It was just sad. Here's my response. Anyway, we'll ask a few more questions, then I'll let you go to bed, okay? What is your response to Palestinians who have lost hope in peaceful protests after the failure and deaths of the 2018 Trump embassy protests?
Well, also there's the yearly Land Day protests and Nakba protests that happen. So for years and years, Palestinians have been peacefully protesting at the border with Gaza and have been demanding their rights peacefully. And they've been met with violence. Actually, interesting fact, the Syrian revolution spread to the Palestinian camps in Lebanon because of a similar event. The Palestinian camps in Syria because of a similar event. Is that in 2011 or 2012, I forgot exactly what it was. One of those years, there was a large protest of Palestinians in Syria who went to the border with Israel or with occupied Golan and were gunned down by the Israeli army. And these were like mostly peaceful protests. And then later at the funerals in the in Yarmouk camp outside of Damascus among the Palestinian population, thugs that were associated with the PFLP GC, that's the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command, which was a Syrian offshoot of the PFLP. And the Syrian government did this in a lot of cases. They would try to create like divisions within Palestinian factions to try and control them. They did a lot to undermine the Palestinian cause. Holy fuck. And also a lot of the fighting in Lebanon was because Syria tried to create a faction group within Fatah, which was called Fatah al-Intifada, and there was a gigantic battle in Tripoli in the 80s because of that. And Yasser Arafat actually snuck back into Lebanon to fight against the Syrian government during that time. It's sort of like a lot of people overlook that aspect of the Lebanese civil war. But in 2012, 2011, this protest on the border with Golan ended with these deaths, and then there were funerals in the camps, and the PFLP GC thugs killed people at the funerals because they were fucking pissed that the PFLP GC kind of encouraged these protests, but did nothing to protect the people, and sort of knew, like they kind of knew that it was going to be the Israelis just gunning people down in cold blood, and they let it happen. And they burned down the headquarters of the PFLP GC. They fought back, and that's kind of when Assad started going like batshit against the Palestinians. And the Assad government has literally murdered Palestinians in retaliation for the Palestinians rising against them. Like they've literally committed ethnic cleansing against Palestinians in Syria. And a lot of the people that are cheering people getting fucking murdered at a rave have nothing to say about that shit. But so the point I'm trying to make is that there's a long history of nonviolent resistance in Palestine that should continue. Like that's something we can all get behind. But this fucks everybody. And like it doesn't mean that nonviolent resistance should stop. And I think that what Israel has done in terms of like colonizing the West Bank and imprisoning Gaza is something that they can't hide. And I think that Israeli society is changing. I think that, like, I'm not Jewish, but I have a lot of cousins who are Jewish. I think that opinions of people who are Jewish in America are shifting very dramatically towards being kind of like a more focused on realizing that there's a lot of issues in Israel right now that have to be resolved. And there's almost like this dissident Zionism in America that's good to see. And like,
have you seen the difference between Democrats and Republicans? How much the opinion has shifted between Republicans and Democrats on this issue?
Yeah, I think it's really good that more Democrats now are realizing that a lot of what Israel has done is really fucked up and wrong, and that that a lot of what's driving the problems is the sheer injustice of it. But I mean, you just see people go out that just want to like shoot the entire movement in the dick by like talking about decolonizing a fucking rave. And also, people are referring to these people that were killed as settlers. They're not settlers. Like, these are kibbutzim. These are mostly like a lot of these are like left-wing communities that want nothing to do with the settlers. Like, it's the opposite of the settlers. Yeah, and if you're somebody that thinks that every Jew that's born in the Holy Land has to leave, then go fuck yourself and go fight for Hamas. You know, like, you're not advocating a real outcome. Even fucking Hamas and the most extreme factions, ultimately, I think they know that the actual solution is going to be either 2 states along the 1967 borders or every single person votes. That's it. Those are the only 2 solutions.
Okay, I appreciate it. Will you take one more question?
Please.
Okay, chat. Everybody charge up your best question and compete, okay? And I'll choose the best one or the worst one, depending on my mood. Okay, I'll give him 20 seconds to figure this out. Man, what do you think of Code Pink, Patrick? This is a question for me. It doesn't count.
Sorry, are you taking it or me?
I'm asking you.
Oh, they're morons. Imbeciles.
Got you.
And like, they have, just no moral voice whatsoever. Blatantly supporting Russia. Blatantly siding with people that are overt fascists. Just no moral authority whatsoever. Fuck them.
I think this is a good question. Do you think Bibi's government will survive after the war?
No.
Can we really jump to a conclusion real quick before we know how it ends?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, that's who knows. Like, maybe there's some scenario where they want someone that's a drooling imbecile that resulted in the biggest security breach in the entire. Here's how I compare this. Right. This situation that Netanyahu created is as if, like, let's say there's a future where George W. Bush, just as he came into office before 9/11, had said, hey, we have to invade Iraq and Afghanistan and take thousands of casualties, right? And it's going to be a mess. But if we don't do that, there's going to be some big terrorist attack. It's as if he'd done that and like made us bleed for that for years, and then fucking 9/11 happens anyway. Like, that's what it's like. It's not that Netanyahu's not in the position that Bush was in, like right after 9/11. He's in the position that like America was in 20 years into Afghanistan, and then like asking the entire world to like support him. It's not going to happen. Like, the people, they'll all say like, I support Israel, blah blah blah, and I don't know. It's my prediction. Who the fuck knows? But it's just that they've really, like, he's really itching to get rid of the goodwill that they kind of have right now from the world. And I think that the families of a lot of people that were killed and taken are going to have a hell of a lot of questions for him. I think that as this goes on, they're not, like, they're ruthless, but they're not stupid. They're not going to just kill all these hostages at once. They probably have them spread out all over the place. They could have some of them in Egypt. So if Israel does a land incursion, they're going to start killing them systematically, and it's not going to happen all at once. It's going to be one day, there's a battle in one part of Gaza, and then Hamas broadcasts that they execute some hostages, maybe 3 or 4, right? And then a week goes by and there's more fighting, and then there's different fighting flares up in different parts of the country. More soldiers die, more Palestinian neighborhoods are eradicated, and then, here comes another round of them killing people. It's not going to be just go in and then they're all killed. It's going to be a prolonged, horrifying bloodbath. And this imbecile that got them into this position is not going to gain the sympathy of the public, I don't think. I mean, I'm not Israeli, I don't know. But, like, it seems like everybody knows he's an idiot, and that this idiot's goodwill is not going to last.
Okay, I'm gonna just ask this so this person has a little bit of reality check. What do you think of Destiny's response to the war?
What do you say?
Exactly. Thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate it. You have a fantastic sleep. Okay, Patrick?
Absolutely. See you soon, buddy. Bye.
See you later. Bye-bye. Oh! Why would you guys assume that he knows? Okay, number one, why do we even assume he knows who Destiny is? Okay, and number two, Why would he know what he said? He's a fucking random war. You think, okay, you guys are in such a fucking bubble that you're asking. I'm inviting on actual war reporters who go to fucking West Bank, and you're like, what do you think of Destiny's taking the war? What do you think of Vosh and the horse cock? Mr. Reporter? Okay, fucking reel it in, boys. Reel it in. Touch a little grass, okay? The person who asked that question, I diagnose you with permanently online, and I prescribe you 5 picnics, okay? 5 picnics of grass touching. You asked them, but you asked the question, and I translated the question. And it was the last question you guys were gonna, 55 cc's of grass. You get it. You get it, boys. You get it. StoicViper wanted to call in too. Stoic, do you want to call in quick? We can make this a quick call. Have you in, give your opinion quick, because I want to go through all the worst takes about this war. I want to go through the worst dog shit, garbage ass opinions about this war. And then talk about the worst opinions and how people are trying to blame Ukraine for this war, which is absolutely wild. Dude, Ukraine's at fault for everything, huh? Crazy. It's crazy. Hello, how's it going?
I'm good. What about yourself, Dylan? Been a while.
You know, I think, yeah, it has been a very long while. When's the last time we talked?
Last year, some year, or something like that. Something ridiculous.
It must be. It has to be at least last year. Thank you so much for coming on the program. Definitely at such short notice. I saw you guys. You were interested in coming on.
Yeah.
Wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about what's going on. So what's itching you?
Oh, I just want to sort of like mention a couple things.
Okay.
That the amount of I should just say the amount of cringe that I've actually been seeing on my feed has just boggled my brain. Like, it seems that there's a big problem with a lot of people across the political spectrum to try give a nuanced take on what's going on at the moment. Like, you either have apologists for literal Hamas terror, or you have like the extreme Zionists who want to like basically make Gaza a parking lot. It seems that the opinions in the middle, or the opinions that are like, okay, well, maybe Hamas is bad, which it is, and maybe, you know, making Gaza into a parking lot is also bad. But I just wanted to sort of like mention a couple things that I must say I agree completely with Patrick, especially when it comes to the BB government, because the BB government took the forces that were deployed in the south.
No, wait, can I ask you a question before we move on? Before we move on,
yeah,
Patrick would be considered
a curd is a curd.
on the very. Well, 1 second, I got a donation.
Flemmy gifted 5 tier 1
no worries.
subscriptions. Thank you for having Patrick on. It's good that you give the new guys a little bit of
The
limelight.
new guys. Thank you for the 5 gifts to tier 1 subs. I love having Patrick on. Patrick helped get me into journalism. If it wasn't for him, I would have been possibly a little lost and confused when I got to Lviv. Who knows where I'd be now? Really appreciate his support and always love bringing him on. Recently, I know a few of you guys went and read his articles after I brought him on stream, and one of you guys met him in person and was like being like, "Hey, I read your article about heroin use and addiction, and it was really good." And it really put a smile on his face. So I appreciate you guys putting a smile on his face. Thank you for the 5 gifts to tier 1 subs, family. I appreciate it as always. I completely forgot. Oh yes, this is the question. Patrick is considered probably to the left of most people in the United States on Palestine. Definitely when he's saying things like Israel is an apartheid state, right? I would say, would you say that he is to the left of you on this issue, or that I know the left-right paradigm on this issue is confusing, and like America is considered left-wing to support Palestine and right-wing to support Israel. Would you say that you agree with him on stuff like that?
When it comes to the apartheid analogy and this claim that Israel's an apartheid state, I disagree with them on, actually. I don't believe Israel's
I'll let you explain that in a
state.
moment, but I'm only asking that to say one thing. That you and Patrick have real disagreements about how you view this conflict, but you both agree about his assessment about BB. Now, I just wanted to lay that foundation
100%.
so people can see that this isn't just some, like, when I said it, it's not just me saying it, it's not just Patrick saying it. It seems that everyone is acknowledging that this was a huge failure for the Israelis and BB's government. So continue. I just wanted to show that this is bipartisan.
Okay. Yeah, Bibi completely pulled most of the forces that were supposed to, that he claimed would protect the south of Israel, and allowed the communities of the south essentially to, do their own defense. And he put those forces in the West Bank to help the settlers essentially in those areas. And Bibi has been promising for years to destroy Hamas. He's been promising for years to bolster Israeli security. And when this happened, this was not only a disgrace for his government, it was also a failure of his policies. Which to me is just the fact that this was allowed to happen, the fact that such a huge breach of Israeli security was allowed to happen, where you had literal paragliders, you have hardly anyone at the fence essentially breaking in to the south of Israel and then committing large-scale atrocities against women, children, the elderly, men. Horrendous, absolutely horrendous.
So Patrick said that the reason that Israel is an apartheid state is because the laws for Palestinians and Israelis are different. They're treated by two different sets of law. They're treated differently by the state. Because of that, they are an apartheid state. And that if, he went even further to say that if the state of affairs in South Africa during the apartheid regime continued, it'd probably look a lot like what we're seeing today when it comes to the violence. What do you think of that?
First off, I would just have to say that apartheid is motivated by racial animus. Now, there are about 20 to 25% of Arab Israelis who live within Israel that are afforded the same rights as Israelis. You have Arab judges as well as Arab politicians within the Knesset who are allowed to run as equals, essentially, to their Jewish counterparts. Apartheid in South Africa, which was based on the racially motivated system of differentiating between blacks, coloreds, and this is their racial categorization, by the way, it's not like a fact of that, but blacks, coloreds, and whites essentially, and then amongst whites you have Afrikaners and English South Africans. Like, for example, I am an English South African and I would be considered lesser to an Afrikaans South Africans, and I met plenty of Afrikaans South Africans who still hold very you could say racially charged views, let's put it that way, towards non-whites especially. But in Israel, they have Arabs who are afforded the same rights as Jews, essentially. Now, when it comes to Palestinians, especially when it comes to the West Bank or when it comes to Gaza, are treated in the vicinity of the law of armed conflict. So they're treated in a, how can I say it, in a security perspective, where they are not considered technically citizens of the state and are therefore treated as a security or potential. By the way, this goes for mostly groups like the Palestinian militants especially. Now, as for things like occupation and that, I would agree actually with many on the left that Israel is occupying the West Bank and it is occupying the Golan Line, because those things are relatively straightforward. It maintains effective control over those areas and such. Whereas in Gaza, to me, it's a bit of a different situation, because Israel, I don't know, just by the way, stop me if I'm going a bit too far over here, Dylan, by the way.
Can I ask you, because you said like essentially they have the same rights. Why the word essentially?
Well, the thing about it is that, yes, on paper, they have the same legal rights as Israelis, but that doesn't necessarily mean it'll stop, I would say, the racial, I guess, racialism that some of Israelis have towards Arab Israelis. Those racial animosity, which is, may I just say, quite common within different societies, especially when it comes to different racial groups and that. But what I'm saying is that from a governmental standpoint and from a legal standpoint, Arab Israelis are afforded the same rights as Jewish Israelis within the state of Israel. Yeah. So must I continue, or do you want to push back, or what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I would talk about the expansion of illegal settlements, because that means you're not respecting the property rights of Palestinians, which I would say is unbelievably horrific, and that's not only illegal under international law, but not respecting the people's ability to build homes and putting down your settlers. I don't know if I use the word apartheid specifically, but that's colonialism almost certainly. And the thing that gets me specifically about the state of affairs of like treating the Gaza and the West Bank as like security operation, the blockade's been there for like 67 years. If the security operation is going on for decades upon decades upon decades, at a certain point, it's no longer like a military security. It's just the state of affairs. It isn't like some temporary. It was supposed to be temporary, but now that it isn't temporary, if they continue that state of affairs, then they're keeping these Palestinians at a lower legal status without representation for, I mean, decades.
Now, I just want to say that I don't agree with the settlements in the West Bank. I do believe that they do violate international law. And I will agree that the West Bank is occupied as per international law. What I would disagree is whether or not, for example, Gaza is occupied. And I would have to push back on the principle of the blockade, because there's a reason for the periphery situation on Gaza prior. And it's purely because that Gaza, for example, rejected not only the Oslo Accords, as we know, it's rejected the parameters of the Oslo Accords. And part of the Oslo Accords is acknowledging that Israel is a state that can be actually engaged with. Because the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah, which I believe or not, that despite my criticisms of Abbas, and despite my criticisms of Fatah and the PLO in the past, I see them more as a legitimate entity in the West Bank than I do, for example, in Gaza. What I see with Hamas in Gaza is essentially a jihadist organization occupying the Gaza Strip, having essentially forced their way into control of the Gaza Strip. Because we must remember that after Israel disengaged in 2005, where it unilaterally withdrew in 2005, it had settlements in Gaza, had all that. It completely pushed those settlers out because of Ariel Sharon's policy of disengagement and pulled its forces out of Gaza in 2005. In 2000 and from 2005 to 2006, the PA managed to take control of the Gaza Strip, administering almost the same kind of like authority that they have in the West Bank in Gaza. And then, of course, in the 2006 elections, we have Hamas essentially winning a significant portion within the Palestinian Authority, and then essentially launching a coup against Fatah, kicking them out in 2006, 2007 during that whole war over there. So I view the situation in the West Bank as something that needs to be addressed, especially when it comes to settlements. And I do believe, for example, that there should be some form of negotiated settlement when it comes to recognizing the rights of the Palestinians over there as their own independent state, and also having an independent Palestinian state that's led by a democratically elected Palestinian Authority. But what I don't agree with is allowing, for example, Hamas to operate effectively what can be only described as a kind of a terror statelet. Because part of the reason why, for example, Israel and Egypt maintain you could say, the border crossings, because both of them do it. Egypt does it to the south, Israel does it to the north, is because of preventing the transfer of potentially, you could say, terrorist equipment, terrorist funding and such into Gaza. And because Gaza is basically then this is why my biggest argument, I could say, against this idea that Gaza is occupied is it's run by Hamas. The local government is Hamas, and it runs the operations within the Gaza Strip. Does that necessarily excuse what Israel does in Gaza? Of course it doesn't. It's violated human rights. It's violated the rights of Gazan people and that. But there has to be some form of an understanding that, at least from the Israeli standpoint. So what I'm saying over here is I'm trying to provide like the Israeli standpoint to, at least when it comes to Hamas and Gaza and that. Does that make sense? I hope I've...
I mean, I guess the stuff that always gets me is under Israeli law, Jews are given preferential treatment. And they're very open about the fact that they're a Jewish state. Like, if I was born a Jew in New York who never touched the land of Israel, I could move there with not too much difficulty. Yep. But somebody who did live there and was displaced during the Nakba in 1948 can't return. And so when I hear that, and I know that these two groups are treated differently, one who's never stepped on the land, and people who lived on the land, grew up on the land, and had generations live on the land. And I don't know if I'm going to use the word apartheid to describe that, because it's not necessarily racial, it's more religious, and there's a different connotation to it. But that state of affairs is treating two groups of people who should have the same rights radically differently.
I understand that, but again, I'll reiterate
Actually,
that
I'll go further to say that the Jew moving from New York probably has almost certainly has less right to be there than the Palestinian who was displaced.
That is, as I said, it's a kind of a contentious debate. Part of the reason, for example, in negotiations between the Palestinian Authority and the State of Israel, it always hinges on a couple of points. One of the points being, of course, this idea of a right of return for Palestinians and sort of like bringing back Palestinians that were initially displaced in 1948. I do get that, and it has always been a contentious point. Like, part of the reason why negotiations usually break down is because of the principle that, first of all, who controls Jerusalem, that's the big one, and of course the amount of people that get to return to Israel, because Israel, I guess you could say, like, especially conservative Israelis do have this idea that the Palestinians shouldn't be given a right of return because of the inflation of the, you could say, the category of Palestinian refugee and what classes as a person who was displaced originally from 1948. So that's really what those issues are, quite contentious. My view is I understand fundamentally, if I were to play devil's advocate for a moment, okay.
Patrick just sent me a DM. He wanted to clarify. He didn't mean an apartheid state. He meant that they are practicing apartheid.
Again, I would say that, I guess I don't want to get too much into like a legalistic kind of like, you know, what words are we using here and there, but especially if the Palestinians, I guess, are not recognized as Israelis. Okay, if the class is different citizenship group, for example, as Israelis are then, the Israeli government then treats them as a separate category to the actual state of Israel, as opposed to, say, for instance, an Arab Israeli, for example, who accepts the citizenship of Israel. There's like basically citizen versus non-citizen in that sense. Like, for example, there's a lot of, I would say, like, there's a lot of Palestinians, for example, living in Jordan. And a lot of the time, the Jordanians don't necessarily treat the Palestinians that come from the West Bank into the East Bank as necessarily equal citizens all the time. They treat them as like a separate class. The international community doesn't recognize that, and to be honest, that is not recognized as practicing apartheid in that system over there. Yet it seems to be the case that when people look at Israel, for example, they want to simultaneously say that that
Can you give me a moment?
Palestinians. Sorry.
Patrick said that he wants to join the call. Would you care if I added him to the call so he could clarify his own position?
Okay. Oh, no. I'm like, as I say, I'm not attacking Patrick's position at all. I'm just sort of clarifying my own position, my own understanding of the situation on that. So, but he's welcome to come.
Got you. He just said you're a rat bastard. Okay. I'm kidding.
Damn. A rat bastard, man. That's a new one.
Bad. Oh. Let's keep it civil, chat. Chat, I see you guys are going crazy. Chat, if anybody endorses terrorism in chat, you will be banned. Anybody calls the Palestinians dogs or something, you're gonna be banned. Don't be a racist piece of shit and you won't get banned, okay? I'll accept most variations of political positions on this, but if you just, like, TOS is pretty not hard to follow. Come on. Okay, so I've got you both here. Patrick, do you want a moment to clarify your position?
Yeah, I wanted to clarify. I don't think Israel is, in and of itself, an apartheid state. I think they are practicing apartheid in the West Bank and Gaza. And the reason I think that is if you're in some sort of
Patrick, you're kind of cutting out a bit.
Your connection's kind of breaking up a bit, man.
Yeah, I am. I was saying that I don't think that Israel is in and of itself an apartheid state. I think they're practicing apartheid in the West Bank and Gaza. And the reason I give for that is that if you're Jewish and you're born in the settlement, or you're born in East Jerusalem, you can vote. But if you're Palestinian and you're born in East Jerusalem or near.
Patrick, you keep breaking up. You keep breaking up. Are you sure you're near the router? Well, we lost him. So, first thing I want to ask you, Stoic, is why are you using Mossad agents to sabotage Patrick's internet connection?
I'm sorry, but, like, BB got me online. I've got him in another ear. He sort of told me that, hey, get that Patrick off the line. So, I had to do what I had to do.
I see an Israeli chat saying, we got him. They got him. I think he just got sniped.
No, but I just want to say that I understand where Patrick's coming from. But as I said before, for there to be an you there, Patrick?
Yeah, I'm here.
Have you returned? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to finish what you were saying quick? Just like you keep cutting out a little.
That if you're born, I don't think that the state of Israel in and of itself is an apartheid state, because they do have Arab representation and they have Arab Supreme Court judge, all of that. But the situation in the West Bank is apartheid, because if you're born Jewish in the settlements or in East Jerusalem, you have the right to vote in the system, and you have the protection of the military, and the military even goes out of their way to clear your neighbors out. And if you're born Arab, you don't even have the right to vote. That there's no other way to phrase it. I mean, I think that getting hung up on the label might be the wrong thing to do, but to me, that's the distinction that I want to make. I think that Israel could very easily not have any apartheid-like qualities. But what they're doing in the West Bank and Gaza is apartheid, and I would contest the notion that Gaza is unoccupied, because all the means of entry and exit are controlled by the Israeli military.
What about Egypt?
And by Egypt. And also, I would say that those other states that discriminate against Palestinian refugees are basically practicing apartheid. I mentioned the case of Syria earlier, and there they've massacred their Palestinian population. They've deliberately targeted them for being Palestinian. They've killed them in massive retaliatory massacres. They've done everything that you can imagine that would remind you of apartheid, and I think that they are practicing it. And a lot of these Arab states that have massive Palestinian communities happily go to war with them. Like Lebanon has raised Palestinian camps so many times. It happens constantly. They fight against them still. And nobody in the world says anything. So I agree that that's a double standard. But that doesn't mean that it's okay when Israel does it.
Okay, thank you for that, Patrick. Okay, so now, I'll say that those areas, for example, on the West Bank, a lot of the Palestinians over there, especially the obviously the Palestinians over there, they don't consider themselves as Israeli though. And they're not necessarily granted Israeli citizenship either. So for Israel, at least from this, I'm not saying that this is therefore justifies discrimination against Palestinians. Obviously, that's problematic and not really something that I'm saying. What I'm saying is that to the state of Israel, they don't view those people, for example, as Israeli citizens, and therefore they do treat them differently because those groups themselves don't claim to be Israeli citizens either. You understand where I'm trying to get at,
No, I do understand, but that's sort of like the Bantustan argument that was used to justify division in South Africa. They'd say that these townships are independent nations. We're not practicing apartheid. They're in charge of their own matters. It's the Indian reservation logic. Like, I don't really think that I probably don't really disagree with you much, if I'm being honest, because a lot of the things you said sound refreshingly rational to me. So I'm not in here trying to confront you and get stuck up on a word like apartheid, but it is, at the very least, I think that the comparison to apartheid for what's happening in the West Bank and Gaza is fair. And I think that whatever it is, it's undeniably deep, systemic racial segregation.
Okay.
Let's have Stoic have a period of talk that's uninterrupted for.
No. I get where Patrick's coming from at the end of the day, but Arab residing in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip are not and never have been Israeli citizens. And therefore they cannot claim rights due to Israeli citizens. You know what I'm trying to get?
But
There's
I understand your point.
Hey,
but
wait,
but
Patrick, you gotta let him finish. He's been waiting.
Okay, no, I'll let him finish. I'll let him finish. Of course.
yeah,
Talking
sorry.
stick is in Stoic's hands. Okay.
Like, yeah, like all countries favor their own like citizens vis-a-vis non-citizens, and doing so is not necessarily if they're being treated differently, like the difference between non-citizen and citizen, that doesn't necessarily indicate that this is like a system of apartheid that they're applying. And I guess that's my main point. The Israeli state treats those groups, and I agree that Palestinians should be treated better, especially in those areas of settlement, which I disagree with. I don't believe that settlements, especially since we've already allocated also accords different zones, and that settlers should be violating those accords and expand the settlements. I don't agree, for example, with the Kahanas or the right-wing government that insists on basically expanding these settlements and that. But again, if we're talking legalism, because the thing about this is that I know that it sounds like, oh my God, but is he justifying this? I'm not justifying. What I'm saying is that legally speaking, it's not apartheid. And that's what I know you may say the practicing apartheid, but it's not that. I know it's hard, but yeah, that's where I'm trying to get at the end of the day.
But what do you call it when, that argument could make sense if you don't have the settlements. Because you have people that are practicing what they consider to be sovereignty over the territory in these enclaves who have the entire disposal of the military and the law on their side. And they do indeed live under a separate system of laws. And forget occupation, non-occupation. On the same territory, 4 generations, your bloodline determines whether or not you can vote. And the reasons for that might be slightly different. But at the end of the day, there's always some kind of way that you can create some legal loophole that makes it seem like, oh, maybe, maybe this is not a separation between black and white, separation between Xhosa and Zulu and white and Dutch and English. You can subdivide it however you want. But it is ultimately one people gets rights and one people doesn't. That's in practice, the comparison is fair, I think. If you want to call it that, who cares? But the comparison is fair.
Yeah, but also the comparison to Bantustans is, I know that I've heard a lot of people utilize the analogy of Bantustans, but when it comes to Bantustans, even Bantustans never had the same degree of control, for example, that the PA has over the West Bank, or that, let alone that Hamas or the Gazan government has over its own territory. Bantustans were artificial in their nature. And yes, I agree. The apartheid government in South Africa claimed that these states were independent, but effectively they weren't, especially since that at any time the South African government, which most times actually coordinated the governorship of these Bantustans, may I just say so, could liquidate these Bantustans and actually bring in security forces whenever they wanted to. And most times did monitor the border outposts of these Bantustans. So I wouldn't call, for example, the West Bank, for example, or Gaza, and or equivocate them to a Bantustan. At least that's from my personal perspective.
Okay, but what you've described is kind of just the ideal security situation that Netanyahu has essentially advocated for. That they have complete control over the enclaves, and that all access to the outside world is controlled by the Israeli state. Everything inside the enclaves, civil society without weapons, is controlled by the Palestinians. So just because it hasn't worked out in the same circumstance doesn't mean that the comparison isn't fair. But I do think that we're getting too hung up on the word for it, because either way you can argue that it's bad. Am I wrong?
I agree. I agree that settlements and expansion of settlements are not good.
But it's
so I don't disagree on that.
but it's also it's the law that sends a kid who throws a stone to jail 99% of the time for years and years, and consistently protect settlers when they commit acts of arson, when they commit acts of religious desecration. It protects those people, and it comes down incredibly harsh with a military system on civilians on the other side. That's not a coincidence. That's not because of some just security paradigm. It's because extremists have kind of taken control of territory that's not theirs to live on at the expense of everyone else.
Yeah. Again, I agree. I think that and this is why, like, I fundamentally disagree. I just maybe it's because of my legalistic training that I'm a bit hung up on certain usages of words, because I think you could probably agree with me, Patrick, that when you see certain things like online or said by people that for example, are not necessarily true, or you at least know that like the actual nature, you can also get a little bit hung up on those little peculiarities. But I don't fundamentally disagree with you on the principle that these settlements have been abused by the right wing in Israel, and that Netanyahu especially, as well as Bennett before him and the Kahanis and that, have been trying to expand these settlements and have interests that are obviously not in keeping with international law and with the rights, I guess, of Palestinians. So I agree with you fundamentally there.
Also is unquestionably segregation, and it's generational segregation. Like there isn't a legalistic way to say that it's not that. You can argue what kind of segregation it is, but it is.
I mean, we can go like back and forth on this a bit, but I guess maybe I was equal ground over here that I do fundamentally agree that settlements and the abuse of the settlements should be curtailed. I do fundamentally agree with that. So I think maybe that's like a common ground over here.
Here's the question I wanted to ask Stoic, because I know Stoic is probably more hawkish than both me and Patrick. Would you disagree with that assessment?
Well, the thing about it is that for me, I can kind of understand I guess to some extent, the Israeli state's thought process when it comes to Gaza, especially. As for the West Bank, I'm more open to debate on that one.
I wanted to ask about how should Israel respond to what just happened? I mean, this is the most massive attack on Israel probably since 1970. More rockets were fired in a 24-hour time period than the entirety of the 2014 war. I mean, the massacres in southern Israel. I mean, on a scale that's really unprecedented. The issues at hand, could they ever at all be solved by negotiation here? Would Bibi's government negotiate with Hamas, negotiate with, oh my God, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, try to bring Fatah to the table or any other parties that could find a solution that would actually maybe lessen the amount of violence and not just kick the can down the road again?
Well, here's the thing, is that effectively Hamas has been governing the West Bank, as we mentioned, since effectively 2007, if we kind of like ignore the year of fighting that it was, effectively control completely the Gaza Strip. And in that time period, Hamas hasn't tried to moderate it. Hamas has not tried to alter its behavior. And Hamas has been launching repeatedly attacks, obviously saying that they're doing it because they're fighting for the resistance. As we know, they don't represent the Palestinian cause. They're sort of like hijacking the cause for their backers, essentially. What do I think should happen, I guess, when it comes to Gaza is that, first of all, I've criticized this. I remember back in 2021, and then prior to that, I've always criticized this, the status quo that has kind of like been established, I guess, between the Israeli state having this really the security approach to Gaza. Because on the one hand, I understand that from the Israeli standpoint, they've been tolerating for over a decade pretty much a terror statelet on the border that's been attacking and killing civilians essentially within Israel's borders. And repeatedly, time and time again, whenever there's a ceasefire negotiated, mediated either by Qatar or Egypt or Jordan or elsewhere, the cycle lulls for a bit and then starts up again. And if essentially with that kind of a security situation, you can either continue to push it down the road and continue to have the status quo continue repeatedly with the whole ebbs and flows, or alternatively, you could remove or try to your best remove the regime in Gaza City. Now I've said this. Is that going to be easy? Of course not. There's a whole slew of security challenges, which is one of the things, the concerns that I actually have, is that how can you reassert occupation? Because Ariel Sharon, one of the most hawkish Israeli prime ministers, disengaged in 2005 completely from the Gaza Strip. in this effort that, okay, this whole security approach that we've taken to the Gaza Strip hasn't worked. We need to pull out, and maybe that will solve things. Maybe that will give rise to some form of potential in the Gaza Strip that we can maybe then negotiate and then, of course, have some form of peace with. But the problem with Hamas is, as with Hamas and PIJ and all of them, is that Hamas and PIJ reject the basic fundamentals of the Oslo Accord. Because at least I give criticism to Arafat and I give criticism to Abbas, but at least the PA under Fatah at least acknowledges the basic tenets for the Oslo Accords. And because Hamas rejects those tenets, fundamentally being that Israel should be engaged with at all, you could say, that's part of the reason why, for example, the Quartet of the Middle East, which is sort of like this conference made up of Russia, United States, I think it's United Nations, and that fundamentally sanctioned essentially, cut off aid, you could say, to Hamas and any form of like international support to Hamas. And why, for example, it was designated as a terrorist organization, because Hamas fundamentally rejected the very basic parameters of any form of negotiations. So when you're dealing with a force that doesn't want to come to the negotiating table, and I'll say this, that, you know, the Kahanis and the right wing also share blame for this. I would not deny that. But fundamentally, when you have Hamas who doesn't want to come to negotiating, or who doesn't even recognize the negotiating table, and when you have the PA who completely rejects Hamas as well, where you have the, for example, under Fatah and Abbas and that, who support, for example, Egypt's actions when it comes to the border crossings and to its treatment, I guess you could say, of Hamas, then what is the Israeli state supposed to do? Is it supposed to continue this uneasy status quo, you know, ad infinite, you know, into the future? Does it go try and negotiate a political settlement when one side simply, I would say basically one side fundamentally doesn't even recognize the negotiating table to begin with? Does it dismantle the system in Gaza City, with the potential being of thousands of civilian casualties, which definitely will happen if there is a ground invasion of Gaza, because we know how densely populated Gaza is? It's a very difficult situation. It's an incredibly difficult situation. Like at the moment, I understand the Qataris and I think the Jordanians and Egyptians are trying to mediate some form of like hostage rescue in the Gaza Strip. But fundamentally, this still doesn't solve the issue that is Hamas. So I actually understand that, okay, well, occupation didn't work under Ariel Sharon. We have the status quo that didn't necessarily work either. What do we try next? Do we try reoccupying? Okay, if we do reoccupy, what government do we put in place? What if the population starts, which they definitely will start, an insurgency? Do we then over-securitize the Gaza Strip more so than we did in the past? Or what do we do? So I understand it's quite difficult, and I don't actually have an answer for you. I understand the need for toppling the Hamas regime. I think it needs to be toppled in order for any start to peace, because there is a barrier towards peace. But the potential for calamity...
I want to dissect that quick. I think this will be the last thing we dissect. Throw it back to Patrick.
Yeah.
You don't think that there's any possibility for peace to Hamas are gone?
Who are you asking?
I'm asking you.
Oh, me. I don't think there's any peace until Hamas is gone. That's really fundamentally their barrier to peace. So I don't even think peace negotiation can, or even start of peace negotiations can actually happen until Hamas, PIJ are removed from the equation.
What do you think of that, Patrick?
It's like a pipe dream. It's not a realistic option. Like, you could, if you were looking at like a situation like Syria, you could remove Assad, you could remove the Assad regime, but you couldn't remove their supporters. Like, they're there. They're part of the society.
Yeah.
And the same thing goes for Hamas. You're not gonna, if you kill the leader, then another leader will come up. Like, that's just how it works. And you're talking about how Israel, it's hard for them to negotiate. You know, it's hard for them to accept these compromises. What's to be done? And these are real questions. But think of it from the other perspective. Like, they've been living in what is, for whatever reason, a cage for generations. Can't pretend also that what occurs in the West Bank, just because the conflict is frozen, like, Israel can't act like Russia does. They can't just do local ceasefires and then call it a day and pretend that peace has been achieved. You can't just freeze the conflict in Gaza and then pretend that those people don't have relatives in the West Bank and that their national identity and national struggle isn't related to what's happening in the West Bank, where there's active colonialism going on, where houses are being taken. Even in Jerusalem, the same situation. Houses are being taken. People are moving in and terrorizing people. You can't, like, I understand that these are legitimate security concerns for Israel, and they're legitimate questions that some don't have answers. Like, what happens next is a very difficult question, but I would posit that that question is much more painful and existentially threatening for Palestinians than it is for Israelis. Because the things that are painful for Israel to have to deal with, obviously apart from things like the tragedy that happened yesterday, but things that are painful for Israelis to deal with in terms of negotiation or having to face your enemies do not create the daily humiliation for them and the daily indignity that Palestinians have to live through. Like, yeah, it's difficult if you're Israeli and you're Jewish. I understand that it's very difficult to have to negotiate over the status of some of the holy sites. That's hard, and I understand it. But it's not the same thing as being in a situation where your fucking neighbors are allowed to vote in elections. The army is there to protect them. They're allowed to carry weapons, and you're not even allowed to fly your own flag. Like, and you can argue that, yeah, it's legal for them to fly their flag, but effectively settlers can go over and knock it over, and they will, and they do, and the army will protect them when they do it. So all the points you're making are rational, but think about it from the other perspective. If you're them, think of this, what sacrifice means to them versus to you. It's the scale is completely different. And so the points you're making are very valid, but think about it from their perspective. Like, what they would have to give up is, like, what do they have? It's an area the size of Manhattan, and there's 2 million of them there. Israel is big in comparison. People live in comfort in comparison. I haven't been to Gaza, but I've been to the West Bank and to Israel. I'm sorry, there's a difference. And Israel will have to make sacrifices. It will have to accept stuff that it doesn't like. And I think that there's this kind of incentive to say that we don't want them to have to make any sacrifices that are painful. And the sacrifices we don't want them to make are sacrifices of lives lost or injustices done against Jews, which has happened. But so we don't want any of that. But sacrifices in terms of, like, these holy sites or the Jewish identity of Israel, things like that, to outsiders, it's not like a universal concept. It doesn't appeal to us. Like, we have to understand that we have to see it from both sides. Like, if I'm not Palestinian and I'm not Jewish, so those holy sites are not like a personal connection for me. But for them it is, and for both of them it is. So you can't, like, while you make these very rational arguments, think about how hard it is on the other side, and giving no breathing room for them, giving them nothing to take as like a moral takeaway or something that improves their lives. It will never end. You can't just continue to immiserate people.
Okay, so very quick response, Stoic, because I do have Lunderberg waiting for 22 minutes, so I do want to end this.
I'll just say that it is actually, I understand the difficulties in that, but fundamentally these negotiations have to start at the leadership position. Like, me personally, I would love to have the PA in Ramallah govern the Gaza Strip, but the reality is that a lot of there's a lot of people that do support Hamas, and there's a growing amount of supporters in the West Bank who want to have an alternative to Abbas, and I understand because of the corruption and stuff like that. But fundamentally, the point I'm raising over there is that Israel needs to engage with, I guess, the Palestinian leadership or some form of Palestinian leadership. And if the Palestinian leadership or Hamas or whatever doesn't want to even go to the negotiating table, doesn't want to even engage in that, then Israel then has to resort, I guess you could say, has no choice in their mind to resort to a security approach. Then I understand fundamentally discrimination towards Palestinians and treatment of people in Gaza and such, but from the security standpoint, is that okay? Do we just allow this to continue ad nauseum with all the attacks and that, and we allow the status quo to go on forever and forever and forever without one of the Hamas side coming or wanting to actually moderate and engage with the state of Israel? Or is there some form of potentially doing something about it right now? And that's the question that we'll find out whether or not it works or not.
One last thing, Anthony.
How many civilian deaths would you tolerate to topple Hamas? To topple a party that, despite the violence of their actions, is still the weaker party?
Okay, fundamentally, the whole asymmetric kind of argument that you kind of allude to it over there, we don't say the same thing about Al-Qaeda or Daesh, who are in of course, a much more...
I do say it. I covered that war in Syria, and I do say it. I think the way that we used aerial bombardment was a fucking war crime. and I have friends that were kidnapped and tortured by ISIS. And I think the way that we used artillery in civilian areas where we knew people were trapped, I think was a fucking war crime. And I absolutely condemn it. And I think that whatever security justification Israel wants to use to level cities and to say, oh, we've targeted this area where terrorists meet, it's a fucking city block where people live. I think whatever logic that we ever tried to use against ISIS that was similar to that, we were wrong. Just for the record.
Okay, that's I guess I fundamentally disagree. Like, ideally, I would like no civilians.
And I saw what they did. I saw what those
world.
guys did.
Okay, well, let's StoicViper respond.
Okay, I fundamentally understand. Yeah, I know. I just want to wrap it up because
morally corrupt.
Sorry, but I do fundamentally I understand, but and I would like that if no civilians were harmed, that would be the great dream. But we don't live in that world, so that's really what it boils down to. Do I want to maximize civilian harm? Of course not. But what can you do? You know, what is there left to do? Like, it's not an easy, like, cut, peaceful kind of like, let's all live kumbaya together. It doesn't work like that. You know?
Then it never ends. And the only thing that I know can change tomorrow, that those settlements can be pulled back, and something like an egalitarian solution can be experimented with, as opposed to just adding new burdens onto the population in response to everything that happens. And Israel has the power to do that. Hamas only has the power to do it one day, which they did, and it was a horrible day. But Israel has the power to control Palestinian lives and collectively punish them every single day. So they have the power to change that, and consistently, Netanyahu and consistently the Israeli government has chosen not to change that, and has chosen to take petty actions that are retaliatory. They cut water to Gaza.
I feel like we're
It's
getting
fucking water.
retaliation back and forth right now. We're getting our own.
Yeah, I agree to disagree. I think that's the best.
I think you made rational points. I think you made many rational points, and I really respected the points that you made, actually.
Thank you.
But at the end, when you're
John
saying,
Stewart and
but when you're saying that you favor military action,
Crossfire, I appreciate it. Thank you. It was great. Thank you both for coming on. I really appreciate it. Patrick Hilsman. You find him at Pat Hilsman on Twitter. I think it's at Pat Hilsman, right? Sure. Okay. It's at Hilsman, at Patrick Hilsman on Twitter, or wherever the FSA can be found, and StoicViper at StoicViper on Twitter.
A curd is a curd.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, and thank you, Patrick, for the conversation.
5 Tier 1 subscriptions. Collect like 4 to 6 people with opinions. Maybe like half who lean one way and half the other. Then call that show Hippety Dippety.
You know what? I think that show could be very successful. We get 4 to 6 people with different opinions, have them debate topics and that they disagree about. I think that's a great idea. We should try that. We should try that on the Dylan Burns TV channel. We should try new original ideas. We'll call it a penile.